Well, Reagan. So many Americans would say that a combination of Reagan's rhetoric and his arms build-up, including the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, Star Wars, was crucial to the end of communism. The rhetoric included describing the Soviet Union as an evil empire in 1983, and then there was his speech in Berlin in June 1987 when he said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." There's a book just been published in the United States called Tear Down This Wall, and the author has as a subtitle, "The Speech That Ended the Cold War." I'm going to be debating with that author in the Council on Foreign Relations in New York on the 11th of November, whether this speech really did end the Cold War. I don't think it will be a meeting of minds. Soviet specialists looking at the SDI didn't believe that this anti-missile defense system would work. Roald Sergeyev, the head of Soviet space research, was absolutely certain it wouldn't work and that it could be combated much more cheaply. Sergeyev, incidentally, now lives in the United States and is married to the granddaughter of President Eisenhower. One other small indication of how much the world has changed. But the Soviet military were worried that the technological spin-offs from SDI investment would strengthen the United States armed forces, and as usual, each military-industrial complex argued that the developments on the other side meant that there must be much more investment in their own forces. So the SDI announcement in 1983, although even on Reagan's own optimistic account it would not be operational for 20 years, strengthened Soviet hardliners, just as the evil rhetoric had done. In 1983, there were real fears at the highest level in Moscow, reported to British intelligence by Oleg Gordievsky, the KGB colonel who was working for MI6, that there were fears in Moscow that the exercise that NATO was conducting, called Able Archer, was in fact going to be a surprise attack in the Soviet Union. It wasn't just an exercise. And so the plans for the exercise were altered to reassure the Soviet leadership that this was not going to be a preemptive strike. Now, Reagan, as president, overlapped with 4 Soviet leaders: Brezhnev, Andropov, Chernenko, and Gorbachev. And absolutely nothing changed for the better in East-West relations or in the conditions of people living in Eastern Europe until the last of these 4 leaders, Gorbachev, entered the Kremlin. It was important, nevertheless, that Reagan wanted to be remembered as a peacemaker, not a warmonger. His wife, Nancy Reagan, was even more determined that he should be remembered in that way. Nancy Reagan introduced some of the rational elements, it has to be said. The exact timing of the signing of the INF agreement, banning intermediate nuclear forces in Europe, was determined by Nancy's astrologer in California. George Shultz, the Secretary of State, didn't know why it had to be at this precise time. Gorbachev certainly didn't know why it had to be that time, but Nancy's astrologer knew. There is a new book by James Mann called The Rebellion of Ronald Reagan, which emphasizes just how much in his second term Reagan alarmed not only his conservative Republican base, but people who regarded themselves as realists, such as Henry Kissinger and Brent Scowcroft, by his willingness to negotiate with Gorbachev and to trust him. In concrete policy terms, though, no one was more important on the American side than Secretary of State George Shultz. It was crucial that Reagan preferred his advice to the advice he was getting from Weinberger and Pearl in the Defense Department and from the CIA. And most surprising of all was the role played by an informal advisor of Reagan, a popular historian of Russia, Suzanne Massey, who probably wouldn't be in most people's top 300 American specialists on the Soviet Union, but nevertheless she was able to communicate with Reagan in language he understood. He didn't like abstract expert advice or even technical expert advice. Lord Carrington once complained to me that when he was Secretary General of NATO, he spent several minutes telling Reagan about something he thought was pretty important, and then Reagan said, "You know, there was a movie I was in once," and Carrington said, "I realized he wasn't listening to a single word I said, he was thinking about this wretched movie." So a lot of the specialists couldn't get through to Reagan, but Suzanne Massey got him to think about Russians as people. She also believed that things were really changing in the Soviet Union after Gorbachev became leader, and so she played a significant part in reinforcing Reagan's desire to meet his Soviet counterpart. Margaret Thatcher also played a significant role in that. I've read many interviews in the Hoover Institution archives with people who served in the Reagan administration, and they all say that Reagan's favorite foreign leader and the one he trusted most was Margaret Thatcher. So the fact that she had established a rapport with Gorbachev and believed that this was a man you could do business with, that was also important in Reagan's second term desire to engage with the Soviet leadership. In the early years of the first term, Reagan was not much interested in engaging with Soviet leaders. Although Jack Matlock, who was the leading Soviet specialist on the National Security Council, and then an excellent American ambassador to Moscow from 1987 to 1991, has emphasized that in the later years of his first term, Reagan did want to engage with the Soviet leadership, but as Reagan complained, "These guys keep dying on me." Well, I come now to Pope John Paul II. 1978, he became Pope, first non-Italian in 4.5 centuries. Naturally, this was a matter for huge rejoicing in Poland. And when the Pope returned to his homeland in 1979, that was absolutely decisive for the rise of solidarity. I think it gave Poles a feeling that God was on their side, and certainly solidarity owed its existence to the inspiration provided by the Pope. But not even the Pope could prevent the imposition of martial law at the end of 1981, with Solidarity turned into a weakened underground organisation between 1982 and 1987. The Pope was a serious thorn in the flesh of communist rulers in Eastern Europe. However, no more than Reagan's military power could his moral authority bring communism down. Gorbachev, I would argue, was more important for the transformations of 1989 than Reagan and the Pope put together. For it was the occupants of the Kremlin, not those of the White House or the Vatican, who had locked the doors to change in Eastern Europe and who held the keys which could open them. After 3 infirm leaders in a row, Brezhnev, Andropov and Chernenko, the Politburo chose their youngest member, Gorbachev, as Communist Party leader in March 1985. A lot of people took the view up to the mid-1980s and even beyond that the Soviet system in particular was impervious to change from within. The KGB worked efficiently to eliminate any possibility of change from below, and so far as change from above was concerned, surely that was impossible. A serious reformer would be spotted and eliminated, politically at least, before he had climbed many rungs of the party ladder. The idea that a reformer could climb all the way to the general secretaryship was regarded as especially far-fetched. But Gorbachev was not chosen because he was a reformer. He was already much more of a reformer than he had been prepared to reveal to his Politburo colleagues, and his views became substantially more radical during the years in which he was Soviet leader. But he was chosen because he was already the second secretary of the party who seized the initiative when Chernenko died. The Politburo met the same evening. Within less than 24 hours, he'd been chosen not only by the Politburo but by the Central Committee. He chaired the meeting, first meeting after Chernenko died. So he seized the initiative.